So I know what you're saying is that that wasn't complex enough. Please give me additional complexities, and here you go. The rest of this chapter, or the rest of Module 9 and Module 10, will deal with what happens when things get a little more complex. What happens when we look at this in a different industry or a different type of transaction? And so now is when we start, presenting the complications. Issues with step 1 occur when we identify the contract, and that might not seem very tricky. And to a large degree, it isn't. There will be some sort of larger contracts that may be susceptible to intricacies that we have to identify. And I inserted a lot of this from, just as a side comment, from ASU 606-10-25-1. This is a way of citing gap. And it comes from the FASB codification. And I'll show you that a little bit in class just so you see the FASB codification and understand where it's coming from. But, when you're citing a support for or a defending practice for an accounting treatment, this is how you would cite one. So topic 606 is the revenue recognition topic. This is the major subtopic of that revenue recognition topic. This is, I think, the subtopic of the subtopic, and this is paragraph of the subtopic of the subtopic, whatever. I don't know exactly what the sections are called, but that's, it's a breadcrumb trail is what they actually call it. It's a very technical term, but it allows you to look up different pieces of the codification because the ASU 606 itself is about 110 pages long. So you need a little bit of help. Right. So the parties to the contract have approved the contract somehow in writing, orally, or with their customary business practices. Of course, that's when you just, hey, we sell Happy Meals to people. This is our revenue recognition, and are committed to perform their respective obligations. So that commitment implies that there will be no unilateral right of cancellation without penalty. So in order to recognize revenue, it either has to be non-cancelable or penalty with cancellation. And this doesn't really matter on a small scale when you are buying goods for a price and paying that price right away. What we're talking about more here is when you are, contracting with a supplier and ordering 100,000 units of inventory from a wholesale or a manufacturer, and there will be some time between the order date, the shipping date, and that time period may allow you to cancel. If it does allow you to cancel, then you can't record revenue until the items are until the agreement is no longer cancelable or until there's a penalty with cancellation. The entity can identify each party's rights and payment terms. Typically, this is spelled out in a written contract, or it's understood in an implicit contract with business practices that are customary. It has to have commercial substance. Just means that cash flows will change as a result of the contract. And that we'll talk about why that's important more so when we're talking in intermediate 2 about exchanges of assets. It is probable, and a little bit when we talk about very specialized types of transactions, like bill and hold transactions. And then it is probable that the entity will collect consideration to which is entitled. So we have to consider the intention and the ability to pay when the amount is due. So this collectability concern sort of harkens back to the realized or realizable. Are we entitled to an asset? Will we get an asset for providing goods and services? In order to sort of illustrate what might occur with that collectability concern, and it's not necessarily black and white. So we have a commercial real estate transaction where the seller sells a property, say in a downtown setting, collects a down payment of $150,000 for a total price of $1 million. The person who's buying it finances the remaining $850,000 with a loan. So that's a big loan, right? The buyer intends on starting a restaurant. So this is what they're planning on doing with the place, and has no prior experience in the restaurant industry, while competition in this location is rather high. Okay. The buyer has no other substantial sources of income or investees. So this becomes problematic, right? And this is almost black and white. Yes, they were able to secure a loan but will they actually be able to pay it? Well, if they don't have it, if they're starting a restaurant, there's no prior experience in the restaurant industry. Restaurants eat losses typically for years after startup until they finally become profitable. Competition is going to be really high, so that means that it's not going to be just a sure bet. They're going to get a lot of flack. They're not going to have very wide profit margins, and since there's no other sources of income or investees that are coming in on this, it's doubtful. So doubtful revenue, doubtful that collection is possible or collection will occur. So in that case, we might not have a contract that is ironclad. And then again, other things to think about, again, the cancellation policies, the penalty for cancellation, those are items that you'll see pretty often, especially with large deal transactions between suppliers and retailers. Issues with step 2. Identifying the performance obligations. Now, this is going to be something that is going to be, qualitative, which means just without numbers, but with your professional judgment. You have to determine whether performance obligations are distinct. If they're going to be distinct performance obligations, and that means that we are going to account for them separately, like we did with the Myrmidon game control system, then they're going to have to meet 2 criteria. Each good or service is usable on its own or in combination with goods or services we could get elsewhere. And 2, the service is not highly interrelated with other goods and services in the contract. Right? So 1 becomes a little bit more easy, and a lot of times we can just say yes to this. We do have to give some thought to it. For example, the game console, obviously, we can use that without the network subscription, right? You can be a loner. You don't have to play with other people. The subscription, is that usable without the game console? Well, it depends, right? First, it could be usable on its own without the game console if you could access the network by a PC, right? Maybe you don't need the gaming console itself. Maybe there's other venues of access through other technology, in combination with goods and services it contain elsewhere. Now, this is where it really becomes satisfactory with criteria 1. I could go and buy a gaming console from anybody, the Myrmidon console from anywhere else, and still use that network subscription. So if you can get it somewhere else, that again satisfies this criteria. Number 2 becomes a lot more ambiguous, a lot harder to really say yes or no to, and requires a lot more judgment. The good or service is not highly interrelated with other goods and services in the contract. And the example that's given typically that says, well, when is a good or service so highly interrelated that it is not distinct? And to reflect on that, what we usually call attention to is the construction industry. You can think of a construction project to build a building as a series of performance obligations. Someone has to provide electricity. Someone has to provide hardware. Someone has to provide the lumber, labor, transport of materials. So many, many tiny pieces, but they're all coming to provide one sellable item. And so they are so highly interrelated that we just record construction contracts based on the overall budget of the contract, and we just do the contract price for the entire building and allocate it over time rather than each performance obligation over time. Okay. In this case, then, because they are separable, I would say that the Myrmidon gaming system, because we can use them on their own or potentially use them on their own, they aren't so highly interrelated that they become indistinguishable. Okay. But again, this one is a little trickier. Common items that are not performance obligations. So first, identifying the performance obligation. Now we're going to talk about items that just might seem like a performance obligation, but we don't treat them that way. So any startup fees, processing, activation, initial fees, registration fees. You've had these in different contracts that you sign. These are not typically. So the litmus test is: does it provide an additional product or service to the customer? right? So when I go to the gym and I have to submit a registration fee for my new membership or an application fee, is that giving me any new product? No, it's not. It's just providing me, I'm just prepaying a sort of fee so that I can access the gym services, right? In that case, then, when it doesn't provide it, we're just going to add it to the overall transaction price and allocate it across the standalone performance obligations, right? Because there's no separate revenue recognized for this fee, there's no point-in-time revenue, it's just going to add to the value of the other performance obligations. If we are delivering a distinct service or product, then it should be considered a separate performance obligation. But typically with prepayments and startup fees, there is none. Okay. Warranties. Now, there are two types of warranties. You might think of a warranty as a performance obligation, but it actually is not. So first type of warranty we're going to talk about is a product warranty. Sometimes these are called quality assurance warranties. They're typically short-term manufacturer's warranties, just to ensure that you bought something that is in working condition that you're going to take home, that won't just fall apart within a month or 2 months, maybe up to 6 months or something like that. How we estimate them, typically by historical averages, because this is an uncertainty, right? Is the product going to break down? Is the user going to bring back the product and request a replacement or a repair? So what we do then is we have a historical average of what we've seen on these warranties, and then we recognize an expense and a liability, and this is in accordance with the matching principle, right? The idea is that this warranty entices you to buy the product because it gives you further guarantee that you're going to buy something that's quality or you get to return it. So the cost of it being returned should be associated with the sale revenue in the period it was sold. Right? We don't wait for the product to be returned. We want to recognize the expense in the same period as the sale that it contributed to. So the expense of the warranty helps me sell products because people will have that assurance. And then when they bring it back, we recognize the fact that we have to, give them new inventory or cash, what have you. So this is an example of how you record it. Historical averages suggest that manufacturer's warranties on Myrmidon game console equal 4% of the total sale price of $300. So we're just talking about the console, not the package. If 10,000 consoles were sold, Myrmidon would record the following warranty as an adjusting entry. And this, of course, is just going to be 4% times $300, the price of the console, times 10,000. And this is just an estimate, right? They just make up what they're going to say. It's like maybe it's the cost of the console. Maybe it's the sale price of the console that they base it off of. But they have a 4% average. They say it's 4% of the sale price of the consoles, and we sold 10,000 of them. So if we had warranties on this, then we would record it as a warranty expense and warranty payable. Of course, this reduces net income, and this increases the liability. Now, as people come in and return systems or games, then we would debit the warranty payable to reduce this estimated liability and credit cash or credit inventory, depending on what we did. Was it an exchange? Was it a repair, etc.? Extended warranties, on the other hand, are going to be sold in addition to the product with which they're tied. So an extended warranty is sometimes called a service warranty, so it's a different type of warranty. They're more comprehensive. They're typically more comprehensive than a manufacturer's warranty, and will cover the product for a longer time period. Because they're sold as a separate transaction and a separate sale, if you bought any sort of piece of equipment from any electronic retailer or technological retailer, they ask you if you want to buy the extended warranty, the 2-year, the 3-year, the 5-year. So that separate sale is not going to be included in their revenue recognition of the good they sold. It's going to be a separate item. They're going to recognize it as a deferred revenue, so a liability that they will recognize at the time of purchase and then record revenue on over the time period of the warranty itself. So let's look at a 2-year extended warranty. They're sold for $15 each with each $300 console purchase. If 10,000 consoles are sold, then and there are 76% of the consoles were accompanied with an extended warranty. So you just do a few calculations. You say, we've sold 10,000 consoles, 76% of those sales were accompanied by the sale of an extended warranty. Well, we sold 7,600 extended warranties. We're selling them at $15 each. And that gives me $114,000. So this $114,000, then we receive it in cash, but we haven't done the work yet, right? It's a period of time revenue. So we recognize a deferred revenue for that warranty sale. And over time, then we slowly recognize the warranty over the passage of time. It's a 2-year warranty. So over the passage of 1 year, we would then earn half of that. We would be able to reduce deferred revenue and increase our sales revenue as we fulfilled or stood vigilant over the time period of our warranty obligation. So looking at this with an example, when we include prepayments and warranties, I'm going to use the prior example, and I'm adding a prepayment of $20 that says, I say that this $20 is related to creating a user profile, and the profile adds no additional service or product for the user. So this means it is not an additional PO. So again, you're going to have to be very careful with this because I'm not going to be quote unquote tricky, but I do want you to understand when something's a PO, when something's not a PO. I'm going to use language to suggest one way or the other, and you're going to have to be able to take that information and correctly do this. So not everything's black and white, right? And it won't be in the real world, so get used to it. The Merbeden's consoles come with a 2-year manufacturer. This is, I call them a manufacturer warranty. 2 years would be a little egregious, and that's just me throwing things out there and not really thinking about it. But 6 months would be more likely, but we'll just pretend that there's a 2-year manufacturer's warranty, and estimates the cost of these warranties at 7% of the console's individual manufacturing cost. So notice again, arbitrary how I said it. I say it's now 7% of the manufacturing cost, which is $100. Before I said 4% of their sale price. And again, it doesn't matter as long as you have an estimate that has a historical backing to it. We sold 10,000 of these systems as before. So looking at this transaction now, what we are doing then isn't so different, right? We still have just 2 performance obligations. And that's again why I recommend this approach, because once you realize this is not one, you don't put, registration fee down here. So you start with 300 and the 100 as before. That gave us $400. Remember, we're trying to figure out the proportion of 400 that each of these items makes so that we can allocate the transfer cost appropriately, 75%, 25%. Now, what's changed is the transaction price, right? Because I'm not paying $340 anymore, I'm paying $360. And so that is where we add in this fee. It's not an individual performance obligation because it's not providing an additional good or service. What it's doing is just adding to the overall transaction price, which will add to the overall amount that I actually subscribe or allocate to the console and to the subscription. So this turns out to be $270. After we multiply it by 360, this turns out to be $90. And of course, again, these should add up to 360 because that is the total transfer price that we're allocating between the 2 goods. In order to determine a journal entry, I multiply both of these by $10,000 or not dollars, 10,000 orders that were made, and I get the amount that each one would represent in revenue. So the journal entry would then just change slightly because now we're receiving $360 per order with that additional prepayment, that registration fee. It would be $3,600,000. We have sales revenue of $2,700,000, and then we have deferred revenue of 900,000. And again, increasing an asset, increasing net income, increasing a liability. The warranty aspect of it, so this is the sale of packages. The warranty, again, we take the historical average of 7%, multiply it by whatever the 7% is of. 7% of the console's cost to manufacture, which is only $100, and then multiply it by the number of sales we've made. Right? And that gives me the warranty expense that I want to match to the sales revenue. Right? So the warranty expense, warranty payable, is going to be $70,000. That is this right here. So this decreases my net income. I recognize that expense with the increase of net income that came from the sales revenue, and it increases my liabilities. All right, so customer options for additional services is the final type of performance obligation we may want to add. So sometimes when we buy something, we have provisions to provide additional goods or services at a material discount. Okay. So a material discount is important here. What it means is that we are providing this customer with something that they otherwise would not have access to. Otherwise, not receive without purchase. So I make a purchase, I get a voucher, I get a claim to some future good or service that no one else in the store gets unless they make that same purchase that I did, right? Under these circumstances, we need to record some deferred revenue for that future option. So again, it's an option, right? So maybe they give me a voucher and say, here, come back, redeem this, and you'll get 20% off your next purchase up to $100. All right. So this is going to be something that I haven't done yet, but we still want to record the amount that the option stands for in this current revenue transaction. Because what I'm doing in some ways is prepaying, the price that I'm paying now, part of it is prepaying for the exercisability of this future option. It must be an exclusive right or discount. Like I said, it has to be only because I entered in a specific transaction, and no one else except for the people that entered into that transaction should be given this discount. If it's not that case, if it's just the case that this is available to everyone, then the revenue is only going to be recognized when I actually exercise the option in the future. If it is a separate performance obligation, so if there is a material right that is not exercisable by everyone, then we have to calculate the value of this option. And when we do that, we consider the discount the customer would receive already on the product or service without the material right. So we only want the excess discount. We don't want what everyone else is getting. And then the likelihood that the option will actually be exercised also influences the amount that I would recognize in this situation. All right. So let's look at an example of this. I say, suppose that Myrmidon offered a 30% discount on a special new game controller with any purchase of its package. The specialized game controller costs $75. Myrmidon is already running a 10% discount on these controllers. Myrmidon estimates that 85% of its users will purchase the game controller with the enhanced discount. Again, let's assume 10,000 sales. Everything else is as usual. The console, right? The subscription. I hope you're writing this again and again and not just adding the additional one, because again, you get something from a kinetic piece where you keep writing something down and it starts sticking with you. What is the standalone price? Well, we've already covered the console's straightforward, $300. The subscription, $100, straightforward, 2 years of service. The option now, what is this? Well, in order to calculate the option, remember I say take into account the excess discount. So we have a 30% discount, but that's not the excess discount. It's 30% over the 10, 30% rather than a 10%. So we really only have a 20% material right. So remember, that is, we are getting 20% by buying this package. Anyone who doesn't buy this package is already getting 10%. So that additional 20% is the only amount that makes up our material right. They estimate that 85% of the users will purchase. So we have a 20% material right on $75. That's how much it costs. But then we also have to modify it by the likelihood that we're actually, that our users will actually use this discount. Some of them might not want the enhanced controller. And this becomes, again, the price of the option. So the likelihood of exercising the option. So we have a 20% material right times the $75 price of the controller at its gross price, and then multiply that by the material right, or the likelihood, is going to be $12.75. So that is the price of the option. Now we have a different total transaction price, $412.75. This becomes the new amount that I divide everything by to get what proportion they make up of the total standalone prices. 300 divided by 412.75 is going to be, and this is where you're going to have to start rounding some. In this case, I ask that you round to the nearest tenth. That way our calculations are somewhat on board with each other. 100 divided by 412.75 is 24.2%. And then 1275 divided by 412.75 comes out to 3.1%. So again, these will total to 100% because we're dividing this up 100%, right? Each item makes up a little bit of this amount. And then we want to apply it to the transaction price. Suppose that we still have, the prepayment, so that it was 340 plus 20. We're just making this rate more and more complex slowly. That's that prepayment that doesn't offer an additional good or service. 0.727 times 360, 261.72. 24.2% times 360, 87.12, and 0.31% times 360 is $11.16. And then, of course, you want to make sure that you didn't make a mistake and add up all of these items, because if they don't add up to your transaction price, then you've done something wrong. So this comes up to, I think, 10 cents over it. But with rounding, we're going to incur a little bit of that error. That's okay. Don't worry about it. Okay. So now we take this, translate it to a journal entry. We have cash for $3,600,000. Well, really, in this case, $601,000 because of that slight rounding error. Again, not a huge deal. When you're talking about $3 million, $1,000 becomes something that you can throw out of your car window. 261 times the 10,000 is $2,617,200. That's going to be sales revenue that we recognize now. The subscription revenue, 8712 times 10,000, 871,200. And I'm going to, even though both of these are deferred revenue, I'm going to separate them because I don't, they're going to be recognized at different points, right? This is going to be recognized over time regardless of whether there's an exercise or not. The other one is only going to be recognized, the one I'm recording right now, is only going to be recognized if there is an actual, if there's an actual exercise of the option, but it is deferred revenue. So we get an asset, we get some income, we recognize a liability, we recognize a liability. Okay. Point in time, period of time, point of time in the future, right? Okay, well that is Module 9, and we will explore more issues with these steps going forward in Module 10, and that will wrap up the new revenue recognition standard.